Greetings, hello, how are you? This is Coach Fleischer, and this presentation we're going to be going over a few different things, but we are now into session 2 of module 2, and for this presentation we'll touch on types of resistance, types of modalities, and a modality matrix, which is a way to kind of organize things a little bit and frame things up in terms of like different resistance and different exercises. We've talked a bunch about types of movement, and now when you get into actually working out, you have to load that movement, right? So otherwise you're just lifting air. Well, when you look at types of resistance, there's many different types, and the common thread with most of them is gravity. Gravity wants to pull the weight stack of a selectorized machine to a floor, the barbell in the upper right hand corner, that wants to be pulled to the floor, the medicine balls want to be pulled to the floor, kettlebells, dumbbells, all want to be pulled down to the floor. And even the bands themselves want to be pulled down to the floor, right? Now, a couple of the key differences here are this. With weighted types of resistance, that's being pulled straight down to the floor without any outside influence or redirect. When you get into selectorized, as we talked about before with bicep curls and tricep pushdowns, especially tricep pushdown, tricep extension, that weight stack, the resistance is being redirected over a series of pulleys to the end user who is using a handle to perform an exercise. So in theory, in reality first, the weight stack is being pulled straight down, but in reality what happens is that weight is redirected to the handle, so where that handle is located determines how the resistance feels. Additionally, where the person is positioned relative to that handle will determine how the resistance feels. And you get into the argument of, is it a rotational exercise or a push me or pull me exercise, and that'll change how the resistance feels. But key to a selectorized piece of equipment, the weight stack that is being pulled down to the floor, much like these, barbell, medicine ball, kettlebell, dumbbells, the resistance is being redirected. Where bands differ is with elastomer bands, that's a technical term for saying elastic bands, the further you stretch them, the more resistance they offer, to the point where you actually stretch them so far they break. And different bands have different thicknesses. So the thickness dictates how much resistance is being offered. I use a ton of SPRI tubing, SPRI tubing. It's out of Libertyville, up in Libertyville in Illinois here. Been using them for years, and with their bands, they have a pretty standard format where they have yellow, green, red, blue, purple. And when you look at those bands, yellow is the easiest, green is the next, red, blue, purple. And so as you progress through the color spectrum, the resistance increases. Now, the quirky thing about bands is this. When you use bands over time, they do wear, and as they wear, the resistance offered by them actually changes, however slightly. But what you have to remember is the further you stretch that band, the more resistance it offers, to the point where it breaks. The second thing you have to remember about bands is you could literally do a bicep curl standing on your head using a band, and it won't affect the resistance offered by the band. Now granted, you can make the argument your weight has arm to it and there's mass in the forearm, and so as you're curling up you have to curl up against the mass of your forearm, but specific to bands, they really don't understand gravity. And I always describe it like that, where it's like, bands just don't know gravity, but free weights, kettlebells, medicine balls do, and selectorized machines to a different extent also understand gravity, and bands do not. And I can guarantee you're going to see that somewhere else on a test question. So what you're really after with these different types of resistance is you're trying to elicit a different training response. As we go through this class, I'll be presenting different exercises that overlap types of resistance, that utilize asymmetrical resistance. And actually, you saw something the other day in a different presentation, where you saw the same type of resistance, dumbbells, but you saw asymmetrical resistance curves. And then that required my body to produce asymmetrical force production curves. You may recall I was lying on a bench and I was doing a dumbbell press fly movement. So I was doing a press movement, two joint movement on one side of my body, and I was doing a single arm fly on the other side to work chest at the same time. That asymmetrical loading changed how the resistance felt. So you could, in theory, have an exercise where you're doing asymmetrical movements and it will change how the resistance feels. Just kind of keep that in mind as a side note as we get deeper into the content in this class. So the type of resistance does matter, right? You're trying to work on specific things and get a training response out of your clients. You'll need to utilize different types of resistance to get that response. And you can use these different types of resistance to either progress and or, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, regress an exercise. And I like to always layer in different degrees of difficulty with my clients. So, I might, in terms of progression and regression, have them do one exercise with a machine, but I'll have them do a very similar exercise with a barbell than dumbbells or bands or TRX or another apparatus, something to increase or decrease the challenge level based on where they are in a program. So prudent programming would have you cycling your clients' workouts from varying degrees of low, medium, and high, and maybe super high or very high intensity to help elicit a training response. You can use all the types of resistance seen here to help them in that adaptation process, because all of these help you apply a different type of training stimuli. So I look at resistance and I look at ways to kind of map this out and have a way to organize. And you'll see a couple slides that look very familiar here, but I want you to point out when you look at this, you have different types of resistance across the top. You have a person's own body weight, machine, meaning like cable crossover or selectorized machine, barbell, dumbbell, or something that's unstable. So somebody who does push-ups, they're utilizing their own body weight, tricep dips their own body weight, freestanding squats their own body weight. You get the idea. When you look at this progression to the right, well, they could progress from push-ups, which is a pretty darn safe exercise, right, to doing a matrix chest press, which is a piece of selectorized equipment where they're seated literally upright, pushing against the handles of the machine. Bench press using a barbell, once they have become strong enough, this usually requires a little bit of a coordination curve, right? They have to learn how to actually hold that bar without falling off the bench. And once they become strong enough there, then you can go from bilateral to unilateral exercise where they have a dumbbell in each hand, and each hand works, or each side works independent of the other. And you can then progress that into something that's more unstable. So for example, when I did that press fly movement, where I had a press movement on one side of my body and a fly on the other side with dumbbells, I was in essence making that more unstable because I had a long lever on one side and a shorter lever on the other. I had a single joint exercise on one side, that being the fly, and I had a shorter pressing type movement on the other side, that being the chest press. So here's how you can progress that, right? You could even take unstable a little bit further by layering in another modality. They could do a dumbbell chest press on a physio ball. Take that dumbbell chest press fly movement I was just speaking about and do that on a physio ball. Holy cow, you got to have a ton of core strength to make that happen. So your progressions across this matrix, if you will, freestanding squats to squats literally standing on a physio ball. I have clients do that. Asymmetrical dumbbell squats where you have a dumbbell on one shoulder, or even a barbell if you like. Plain old barbell squats, goblet squat, all right? Tricep extension versus tricep extension with dual action pulley, to where you're doing dumbbell tricep extension, to lying on a Bosu and doing dumbbell tricep extension. So the idea is, on the left-hand side, these are more basic, more stable, and in essence, in general, safer. Over here, you have a greater challenge, a higher degree of difficulty, and they're more unstable. And you use this as a way to progress back and forth during workouts to challenge your people differently, introducing new topics, new ideas, new different exercises that you wouldn't start off right away. You would not have your client, for example, do a squat while standing on a physio ball on day one. They would have to learn how to squat first and do it correctly, and then learn how to actually stand on a Bosu, for example. And then from a Bosu, then maybe they're working on squats, and while they're doing squats on a Bosu and then learning how to do squats with a barbell, then you get them into where they're learning how to actually get on a physio ball. So it's part of a much bigger continuum, and you have to think of it in terms of how you're going to progress your people. And my word, in terms of like what I've even talked about in class, I've talked about different ways to progress or regress, whether it's laying on a bench and doing tricep extension with a cable crossover, or lying on a bench doing cable crossover with a bar. But one of the easiest ways to progress or regress an exercise is Instead of doing 70 pounds with a tricep extension, you do 75. You've just progressed or increased the degree of difficulty on an exercise. Same exercise, same bar, same movement pattern, but you've increased your degree of difficulty. And you'll see later on in class, you've actually increased your overall workload as well. Well, that also holds true in terms of progressing the reps. So you can progress the number of repetitions you do. You're asked to do 10 reps and you do 12, you know mathematically you've gotten stronger, right? And with weight and with repetition, the number of reps and the amount of weight you use are both tools that you can use, and you can back those down where instead of doing like a high rep or a high weight environment, you could do a lower weight and perhaps you're working on balance and coordination. And because you're putting somebody in an unstable environment, you're requiring them inherently to contract more muscle to stabilize and not fall off the BOSU or the physio ball. And also with progression and regression, it's a tool that you use to kind of put your foot on the gas pedal to really push your people along and progress people to go through different variations of exercises to get a training response. But to actually get a good training response, there is a bit of rest, regeneration, recovery, and refuel. And you have to look at it in terms of regression is not a bad thing. Sometimes if you have somebody who's going through several weeks of heavy bench press because you're progressing them towards a long-term goal of maxing on bench press, you can have them in 1 week just as a way to recover and let their body recover a little bit from the rigors of training. Have them do push-ups on a physio ball, or have them do dumbbell bench press lying on a physio ball, or have them do push-ups on a BOSU. Regression is not a bad thing. If you plan it into your workouts correctly, it's actually a great thing that allows you to really overcompensate and increase your training results. So you really have to look at progression and regression, especially the regression part, because I think people miss that so often. It's such a wonderful tool to be able to have a person adapt to a training stimulus and allow their body that time to recover. I'm going to go ahead and go back to this. If you think back to this slide and just kind of think through, like, what are your areas where you can progress and regress in your own workouts? If you've been doing like a ton of squats, okay, Tuesday is squat day and Monday is National Chest Day. Have you been able to find ways in your workouts? And I understand you might be working at home instead of a fitness center or a gym. Are there different ways where you can mix up your progression and regressions in here to challenge your workouts and do things a little bit differently, perhaps go from a more stable environment to an unstable environment, ways to increase the workload through weight or repetition? Perhaps you're doing a bench press off a set of stairs, slightly downhill or uphill to either progress or regress to change the angle of resistance. All very useful tools to help you progress your workouts. So with progression and regression, so you can utilize this across all populations. Yeah, sure. You can use it with the elderly when you start working with them on balance and coordination. You can use it with your high school athletes to be able to integrate in different workouts and progress them through a learning curve on power clean or how to do squats correctly. It can certainly take on many different shapes and forms, and you can use pretty much any tool in a gym for this. And we look at like different modalities. Can you mix and match modalities? Absolutely, you can. You can definitely use a physio ball while doing dumbbells for an exercise. And so use different modalities to help you through a sticking point to progress your workouts. And when you look at progression regression, it can also include the number of rep and sets and percentages used over a training cycle. Absolutely right. And you'll see this when we get deeper into program design. There are literally weeks where we call download or unload or active recuperation weeks that we actually program in to allow our athletes to recover and have a super compensation cycle when they go into the next 12-week, what's called mesocycle, next 12-week program. So absolutely. So I'm asking you, like, when you look at this and you look at the modality matrix that I like to call this, and you look at this progression, and you look for different like chest or triceps or legs, and you look at the different exercises you can do with different modalities across the top, think again in terms of your own workouts, how you can use different modalities and ways to change your exercises. And here's another example of like back, biceps, and shoulders, different exercises that are in each, and how you can progress them over time. Take a second, pause the thing, and look at it and get an idea of how you can use those. But to that end, progression and regression are good, and different modalities are great in developing your training programs. Have a good one, guys. Signing off.